Welcome to the podcast. What an exciting guest we have on for you today. This is the writer and director of a new film coming out, Barron's Cove, Evan Ari Kelman. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's a privilege to be here. Thanks for holding space for this film.
Oh my gosh, it looks incredible. It's dark, it's gritty, and is covering a really interesting subject matter that I felt like almost was taboo for a long time. The film covers a father whose son is killed, and the suspect is another child. And so he tries to take it into his own hands. Can you walk me through the origin of this story? What inspired you to write and make this thing?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's there's a lot of different points of inspiration that sort of all had to connect together at the same time for the story to kind of come to fruition. First of all, you have, all of these themes that I've been thinking about for many years that have, caught my attention for many years. Of course, relationships between fathers and sons, the role that that can play in people's lives, for the rest of their lives and
Yeah.
then beyond. There's elements of generational trauma in there, how somebody's, father treated somebody who treated somebody, sort of down the
Yeah.
line, and the way that, that can affect a family, for generations. I have obviously, my own personal experience. My relationship with my father was thankfully, very, very positive, but unfortunately passed away at a very young age. I was 11 years old when he died. And so that left me with a lot of questions about, the role that fatherhood plays in my life, continues to play in my life, because his influence is still a big part of how I live and what my values are. And I also have seen, the negative side of that relationship play out in, people that I know and friends that I have,
Yeah.
in the way, and I met, met their fathers who weren't always great to them, in some cases violent, and I saw, the effect that that had on them. And, that those sorts of questions started to, have been playing in my mind since I was a kid, since I was really young. And then that gets filtered through not just my life experience, but, the movies, the stories that I love, the films that I love, the thrillers that I love, the crime genre that I love. And I was basically, looking for a way to, talk about these themes and really ask these questions and test these relationships. And it all sort of clicked for me when I heard about this story, this true story that happened in the UK, very tragic story where these young kids lured another younger boy to train tracks, and there was a murder. And a really gruesome murder, and obviously, a really dark story. I just started to ask myself, well, what would have happened if there was a father who had nothing left to lose after his son was killed like this? And what would happen if there was a cover up? What would happen if there was a powerful politician whose son was implicated? What would that conflict look like between, this guy from, one corner of society who had nothing left to lose, and this guy from this other corner of society who had everything to lose? And the canvas started to take shape, and I was able to sort of, fit in all the questions and ideas that, I'd been wrestling with for a long time.
I love the idea that you're tackling generational trauma through a true crime type of story. I really haven't seen anything looked at it that way. Usually it's more of a drama approach. So I feel like the way you're approaching this theme is really going to make people invested in your character and allow you to explore those themes over the different types of subplots you have going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. I mean, look, generational trauma can surface in a lot of very unfortunate ways, right? And that's
Yeah.
why it's something that we need to think about and talk about. And the less we talk about it, the less we understand it, and the more, negative consequences there are of that, right? So this film, among many things, there's a lot of things that it's about. One of them is, how do we sort of rewrite, the narratives that we've been taught,
Yeah.
whether, through ourselves, or maybe it's a narrative that our parents put on us, that we might not be good enough, or we might not be smart enough, or, we can't do these things. This movie is all about, how do we rewrite our self narrative? How do we eliminate our self limiting beliefs, to sort of discover our true selves, our highest selves? In this story, that's manifested through, you know, decisions of forgiveness and sacrifice, but, it doesn't always have to be that way. But that's what this is ultimately about. Um,
I think it's great. I mean, considering generational trauma is something that didn't exist really for our parents and our grandparents, is really something that we've started looking at and realizing, oh my gosh, is this passed down to me, or is this something that I've had to inherit and not pass on to my child? I mean, I'm a parent, so I raising my son and looking at how I was brought up, is like, okay, I'm going to stop that pattern. I'm going to be the generation that puts a stop to it and really allow my child to grow up and be themselves instead of this bullied version of the person I think they should be. So I just think it's great. So you have this incredibly powerful script that you've written and you want to get it made. Can you walk me through that process? Because I'm asking specifically because I'm looking at your cast and it's an absolutely incredible cast.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's hard work, meets preparation, meets luck, meets, time. It's all of those things kind of coming together. I went to NYU Film School. I wanted to learn how to tell stories. I love working with actors. I love writing. I love being on set. I love collaborating, with department heads and figuring out, how do you tell a story, through all the different elements, that you can sort of work with. And really the only way, and I think sort of the best way to do that is through feature film.
Hmm.
When I left NYU, I wanted to make feature films. It's also, one of the only ways that you can hopefully attempt to try to make a living, telling stories.
For sure.
You can't really have a career as a short filmmaker. And I did make, many short films and I loved all those experiences, but you can't do that forever. So for me, part of it was how do I make a feature film? How do I kind of get started? What's my first feature film going to be? And ironically, I made a lot of mistakes, and some of them still miraculously worked out. But I do think there's a lot to learn from. The first feature film that I wrote was a period biopic, actually about my dad.
Okay.
And, I tried to get that made for a little bit and I sent it out to producers and like, I really positioned this as the movie that I wanted to make, now. But a period biopic is a very difficult film to sort of get off the ground. I didn't understand this really, or I didn't want to understand this at the time, but you need, to even attempt to do that, you need major cast like attached already, or you need a major
Yeah.
director. It's a major uphill battle. If you're a first time feature director, forget about it. That was a waste of time for like more than a year easily. It was a lesson that took a minute to learn, but eventually I realized, okay, I have to make, something that can sort of sell on its own. Like the concept has to sell. I want a genre film. I want a thriller. I want something that's commercial, but also I want to, remain authentic to the themes that I want to talk about and the kind of the character journeys that I want to explore. And thankfully, like I said, all these sort of pieces of ideas kind of came together at the right time and I had this idea. But I guess I should also say, I tried to do a lot of things to avoid writing a feature film. I tried.
Really?
Absolutely, because it's so hard.
Did you clean the house one too many times? That's usually what happens to me.
Of course, but I tried to look for shortcuts. I tried to find, short stories to adapt. I tried to find novels to adapt, and I went down all those roads, like
Yeah, the
talking to
IP thing.
authors. Yeah, the IP thing, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
I tried to find other writers, that I could collaborate with, or, I would have an idea and I would say, okay, I'm not a feature screenwriter. Let me find a writer who can sort of take my idea and help me.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? And then I looked for existing features that were already out there. I would look at the blacklist and I would look at the Nichols and I
Hmm.
did everything to try to not write a feature film because it's so hard.
I
And
love
at
that.
some point, and this is a recurring thing that's happened in my career is I just get so frustrated where I just become essentially obsessed and I just have to do that thing. It was the same with my short films where I was just like, okay, I'm not getting I'm not being offered the thing to direct right now. And I would just have so much pent up, like need. I would just be like, okay, I'm going to just not have a life for the next year and make this short film.
I
And that's
love
it.
that though.
And it was the same thing with the feature. I was like, all right, I just have to do this. I just have to write the best feature that I possibly can. And yeah, it's going to be hard, but you have to. This is the hurdle that you just have to jump over. And so I read every single screenwriting book that I could. And I've been reading screenwriting books for years, but not like this. I think for a very short amount of time, I might have been like the world's foremost expert on screenwriting theory.
That's fantastic.
Just for like a few days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was a time, I read everything. And I like to joke that my little office that I was working out of was kind of like that Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme, where Charlie is
Yeah.
that
Oh,
bull
that's
across
great.
lines. And
Yeah.
seeing all these relationships between all these different structures and all these different movies and all these different theories, and
So you read all the screenwriting books?
yeah, I don't want to say I read all of them. Of course, there's so many of them, but I mean, I had the book, the section book.
Story, Save
I
the
mean,
Cat, all that stuff.
yeah, I mean,
That's
of
great.
course, but no, but I'm talking about like esoteric, books that no one's ever heard of, you know,
Oh, that's great.
and then finding there was this great little resource that I've really liked called the Story Diamond. Have you heard of that? Do you know what that is?
No, I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, if you Google it, it'll turn up pretty quickly.
Okay.
It was really interesting to me, and it was only one piece of it, but it sort of unlocked for me how to start to think about it. Because what it does is it's taking somebody took all of these different screenwriting philosophies or structure philosophies and then like overlaid them on top of each other in kind of the shape of a diamond.
That's great.
And so I was able to say, okay, yes, this person is talking about, the inciting incident here, but this all, somebody else is going to use this language for here, and there's a relationship between this and this, and someone else identified the relationship between this and this.
Yeah.
All these things kind of, overlapped on each other, and I was able, after like maybe 2 years of writing the script, it finally sort of worked. But I was
Two
writing,
years?
yeah, I mean, maybe more. Um,
That's okay.
it took me a while to figure out. And by the way, this is a complicated story for so many reasons. The movie I just wrote is so simple, story wise, production wise.
That's great.
Barron's Cove has like dozens of locations and maybe like hundreds of actors. Conceptually, when you think about all the background and the
Yeah.
scenes, and the political speeches and all this stuff. My next film is like basically one character in one location. And that's a result of just like the trauma of having
That's great.
tried to do something so crazy. Um,
Well, I love that you found something for you that worked. I mean, that's why there's so many different screenwriting books out there, because you never know which one is gonna like turn that light bulb on for you. And so I'm so excited that you found it. But I mean, obviously, I mean, you 2 years of writing a script, you put a lot into this thing, and so that's why it's so sophisticated and obviously resonates. I mean, let's talk about the cast. So you've got Tramell Tillman, who was Mr. Milchick from Severance, huge. Brittany Snow, I mean, famous for Pitch Perfect. She's great. She's been in, I've got Garrett Hedlund, which is awesome. Stephen Lang, I mean, what an incredible cast. Were you going after these guys, or, I mean, how did we get them involved?
I mean, the casting process was like a year and a half itself.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's a slow process. Again, for a first time, feature director, and there's a lot of reasons why it's a slow process. First of all, you have to essentially go to, one actor at a time because you have to offer, exclusive offers.
Uh-huh.
And then, there's kind of a bias against first time feature directors because typically the budgets are relatively small. And, it's a catch 22 because if you want to tell a story at a certain budget level, you need, recognizable cast to support the investment of that. But, recognizable cast, names that they're high in demand. So
That's
they're,
a catch 22, right?
yeah, high in demand. So they're typically like unavailable or they're booked for a really long time. Plus they have, and I don't want to like make anyone sound bad, but they have agents who have a responsibility, let's say, to make sure that they're operating at a really high level and getting, great jobs, from big studios. They want to maintain the certain star power of their actors, which is totally fair. And so it's a maze. How do you get, recognizable actors onto your first feature film? And it's hard to get them, but you need to get them. And that's the process, right? And then it's like you can spend 6 months waiting to hear back on an actor and then find out they were never even available to begin with. You know what I mean? Or they never even received the script.
That's
Or
tough.
or they don't even want to do this kind of movie, or they're going to focus on directing their own project. You can wait 8 weeks to find out a no that you should have gotten the first day. You know what I mean? And what happened with Garrett was, we originally essentially didn't feel a ton of traction. He was basically my first choice, and we just were told that essentially, I don't remember exactly what it was, but maybe the timing wasn't right, or he wasn't available, or it wasn't the kind of whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I was speaking with my producer Will, and Will said to me, I have a sense that, maybe the material isn't getting 100% through, you know, and so
Mm,
actually, and this is one of the reasons why it's good to have great producers, and producers that persevere. He was able to get in touch with Garrett directly
nice.
and basically say, we've got this amazing script. And as soon as Garrett read the script, he loved it. I mean, he got the
Isn't
script and
that
he sent
something?
back a long, 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 long email, right? Like the kind of email you dream to get, where
Uh,
he understood it so intuitively. He loved the story. He loved the character. He understood the point. He was writing back to us everything that we loved about the story without us having to say it to him, right? And so we're like, wow, that was actually one of the best days of my life. You know what I
uh,
mean? Because at that point, we're already like, I'm like 3, 4 years into trying to
yeah.
get the script off the ground. And it's like, wow, there might be a chance, you know?
And to get that kind of validation, I mean, you pour your heart into something, and then sometimes you have those doubts of like, am I the only one who's getting this? And then when you have talent read it, I mean, I ended up on set for a film I wrote, and then one of the actors pulled me aside and had just wanted to go through pages and pages of their thoughts on the character, and I was like, wow. I mean, they get it, and so it is such an amazing feeling. So you did shorts, you've got your feature, you just had your premiere in New York. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
What kind of advice do you have out there for filmmakers that, they've done their shorts, they're ready to take that next step into features?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that you have to write the feature. Don't do what I did, which is try to avoid it for many years. You gotta just do it. You gotta learn how to do it well. I'm not I don't have I'm not a s I am a screenwriter obviously now, and I've thankfully become
Yes, sir.
a much better one. The last movie I did, I wrote the first draft in 10 days, whereas Barron's Cove, I wrote the first draft in probably like 2 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've thankfully become good at it, but it's a steep learning curve, and there's no avoiding it. You have to do it. I would write a feature film that has some commercial appeal, something that certainly avoid period, something modern day or close to modern day. Maybe it's a thriller, maybe it's a horror. I mean, that's a lot of people's advice is, write horror because you can do it relatively inexpensively. You
Yeah.
don't
And
necessarily
there's an audience.
there's an audience, and you don't
Yeah.
necessarily need, recognizable actors, to support
Mhm.
the budget or to
For
get
sure.
producers excited, which is really what that's about. So that's something to think about. And then, my film also, I have so many locations, I have so many actors. I have a young actor, which requires you get less time to shoot with a young actor because there's rules for how many hours they can be on set. And then once you start writing, a lot of night scenes with young actors, really screwing yourself because they can't only, again, legally, they can only work for a certain amount of hours once the sun goes down.
Yeah.
Wow. I would avoid those things if you can. I had stunts, I had fire, I had explosions. I mean, I can't avoid that, but if you
You
can
win
avoid,
for it, bro.
oh yeah, I went for it. But I'm naive enough to not know how crazy it was at the time. You know what I mean? Which is
Yeah.
good also. The same thing happened on my short film Bandito, which is about a semi truck robbery. And so we needed, and this, I don't want to spoil, I guess I'll spoil it. Like the semi truck, like gets set on fire and basically like explodes. This was my NYU thesis film. And at the time I'm like, oh yeah, we'll just find a semi truck. Like how hard can that be? We'll just set it on fire. How hard can that be? And, you almost need to be a little naive to sort of make it
Absolutely.
happen.
The
So
youth.
yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, even though now I want to be like, oh, don't do these things. Don't do these things. They were crazy to try. At the same time, you gotta be a little crazy and you gotta be a little naive.
That's fantastic. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have before we wrap up here?
Not necessarily. I think, I know this is, for screenwriters, obviously. I think one thing maybe we didn't talk about is, how did I actually get my producers on this project?
Yeah.
I sent the movie out to a lot of producers. I got a lot of passes. What ultimately worked for me was I submitted it to the Nicholls.
Yeah.
It was, selected to be a Nicholl Semifinalist.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Changed everything because at the time, and the Nichols has changed a lot. I mean, the Nichols is different as of this year. They would publish the list of semifinalists, the log line, and the title. So companies are scanning that. And I had a very commercial log line. And I had about 5 or 6 production companies email me. And one of them was Mandalay Pictures. And, they have an amazing reputation. They've done incredible films. They had an Oscar nominated film like a year or two before that. And they were really passionate about the story. They were excited to work with a first time feature director, which again is, a little bit of luck. And Will Rayner, came aboard and we were off to the races. But, the competitions I think are rough and I know are certainly hit or miss, but it was ultimately the Nicholls that got this script discovered.
That's amazing. I love that advice. So Barron's Cove, is it out in theaters yet?
June 6th, it'll be out. So really soon. And we're in limited theaters. We're in some of the major cities. I'm still figuring out all the theaters. If anyone, is watching this and they want to, follow me, I post a lot of BTS on Instagram. I post, all the theater updates on my Instagram. It's Evkelm, EVKELM on Instagram. And it'll also be VOD on June 6th. So you
Nice.
can watch it at home. Of course, I'd recommend watching it on the biggest, screen,
Of course.
biggest sound system that you can. And yeah, a lot of incredible people worked on this film. It only happened because, of the passion and the hard work of all of our cast and our crew. I mean, this is an indie film that, is operating like, pushed to its extreme capacity of like what an indie film can be, and it's only because our crew just believed in the project and gave everything they could. And I'll be grateful forever.
I look forward to seeing it. Congratulations, Evan.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.